The map of Africa was once drawn in ink within the cold, gilded palaces of Berlin. But today it is being redrawn in sweat and steel in the heart of the savannah. For decades, global powers whispered that the Sahel was a tragedy waiting to unfold, a region destined for chaos, collapse, and the eternal shadow of poverty. They predicted that without their intervention, without their generous hands, the heart of the continent would simply stop beating. Yet while the world waited for a funeral, they witnessed a resurrection. From the arid soil of the Sahel, a miracle has risen, defying every economic and political model the West holds dear. We are no longer talking about fragmented nations begging for crumbs at the table of the elite. We are witnessing the birth of a powerhouse, the Confederation of Sahel States. Under the decisive leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a new architecture of dignity is being built brick by brick from the bottom up. This is not just a geopolitical update. It is the blueprint of a revolution that refuses to be silenced. Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this story resonates with your sense of justice, show your support with a comment or a subscription to Africa Unchained. It means more than numbers. It keeps the flame of dignity burning and ensures these stories reach those who need to hear the truth. How did a nation once written off by the global experts as a failed state manage to become the architect of its own regional destiny? To understand this miracle, we must look at a leadership that has changed the map forever. To the casual observer in Washington or London, the rise of the Sahel might seem like a sudden eruption. But to those who understand the principles of sovereign realism, this was inevitable. It is a philosophy that resonates deeply with the America First spirit, the belief that a nation's primary duty is to its own borders, its own resources, and its own people. To truly grasp the weight of this moment, we must look back to the documented reality of September 2022. Back then, this was not a nation of power. It was a nation under siege. The Strategic Reserve held fewer than 100 functional assault rifles. The army was described as a ghost, sent to defend a graveyard against a monster that never sleeps. There was no industrial machine, no high-tech surveillance, and no regional shield. There was only the hollow click of firing pins striking empty chambers. But the seed of this revolution was not planted in the palaces of the elite. It was planted in the very soil that foreign powers had written off as barren. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré took the helm, he did not ask for a seat at the international table. He built his own table. He understood a truth that many in the West, especially those who have seen their own tax dollars vanished into forever wars, know all too well foreign aid is often a gilded tape. It is a system designed to keep the patient alive but never allowed to walk. The transition of leadership within the Alliance of Sahel States marked the end of an era of managed conflict. For decades, the security of this region had been outsourced to those who watched from air-conditioned command centers while the insurgency only grew stronger. Captain Ibrahim Traoré made the ultimate declaration: the era of the proxy is over. He inherited the responsibility of a confederation forged in the fire of necessity, comprising Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. They realized that their survival depends entirely on their unity. They share the same threat, the same terrain, and now they share a singular, uncompromising destiny. The timeline of this transformation is a masterclass in aggressive reconstruction. In less than 3 years, the leadership has taken a country from zero ammunition to the acquisition of heavy combat drones and the pursuit of nuclear energy. This is the manifestation of dignity over aid. It is the choice to tear up the script of dependency and shatter the rusted locks of the past. The regional chairmanship is now the engine driving a future where they trade, bank, and develop together entirely independent of the coastal powers that turned their backs on them during their darkest hour. Nearly three-quarters of the national territory has been wrestled back from the grip of terror. The flag once again flies with pride over 73 prefectures. You can see it in the calloused hands of the farmers who have returned to ghost towns, and you can feel it in the silence of the guns. This is the economy of dignity in action. But as the celebrations in the streets of Ouagadougou reach a fever pitch, the air in the halls of the old empires has grown cold. They saw the drones, they saw the gold, and they realized that a generation of youth is no longer looking north for validation. But as the people toasted to their new commander, a dark shadow began to stretch across the southern border. The empires were not merely watching, they were recalibrating. The question was no longer if the Sahel would rise, but how the world would react to a region that had finally learned to breathe on its own. As the old empires watched, their silence was not one of respect but of calculation. For decades, the maps of this region were drawn by those who never felt the heat of the Sahelian sun. But by 25, the pen was firmly held by sovereign hands. Under the rotating presidency of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, what began as a military pact born in the fire of necessity was transformed into a living, breathing confederation. This was no longer just about sharing guns. It was about sharing a future, a market, and a singular identity. Let us take a moment here not to rush forward, but to give thanks. Write a comment with a simple thank you to Traoré, to Burkina Faso, or to the spirit of sovereignty itself. Gratitude is not a formality. It is recognition. It is dignity expressed in words. When you add your voice of thanks, you are not just engaging with a video. You are standing in solidarity with a story of freedom and pride. So before we continue, take this pause to comment your thank you. Together, those words become a beacon that shines far beyond the screen. The birth of this confederation was not marked by empty rhetoric, but by the tangible symbols of statehood that the world's powers thought were impossible for these nations to achieve alone. The Prime Minister stood before the people to confirm a reality that shattered the old world order. The alliance of Sahel states' passport and the biometric identity card are now realities. To the modern observer, these might seem like mere administrative tools. But for a nation that has seen its citizens' data stored on foreign servers for decades, this is the ultimate digital jailbreak. By reclaiming their digital and physical identity, these three nations have declared that they are no longer subjects of an empire, but architects of their own survival. But the true heart of this new federation beats in the vaults of the future. The establishment of the Confederate Bank for Investment and Development is perhaps the most radical strike against the structures of neo-colonialism. For those in the West who have watched the steady erosion of their own currency's value, the logic here is clear and compelling. This institution was built to break the centuries-long stranglehold of the CFA franc, a currency that functioned more like a tether than a tool. By providing a financial spine, it allows these nations to fund their own dreams instead of begging for the crumbs of foreign aid. This is the very essence of dignity over aid. It is an economic vote of confidence, a declaration that the gold sleeping beneath the rock will finally be used to light up the schools and power the factories of the people who walk upon it. This institutional birth has created a psychological earthquake across the continent. In the classrooms where fear once ruled, children are now learning a curriculum rooted in their own reality, taught in schools that the administration has reopened by the hundreds. In the hospitals, surgeons are performing the nation's first complex transplants, proving that even in the middle of a war for survival, the Burkinabe spirit does not just patch wounds, it advances science. The people have understood that no one is coming to save them, so they have taken up the tools to save themselves through initiatives like the Faso Maibo, where youth and workers are mobilizing to build their own cities stone by stone. This is the manifestation of what some scholars call the black albino, the rare and paradoxical African state that defies the expected genetic code of failure and dependency. The experts in their glass towers predicted that without foreign support, these nations would collapse in weeks. Yet here stands the anomaly. They predicted that challenging the mining giants would lead to bankruptcy. Yet the state recorded a historic trade surplus of over 1,975 billion CFA francs. The Confederation is the living proof that the standard model of post-colonial governance was never the only option. It was simply the only option the people were allowed to see. As the three capitals were unified by a single vision, the emotional bond between the people and their leaders was sealed not with ink, but with the sweat of collective labor. They have redrawn the diplomatic map and proven that sovereignty is not a gift granted by the powerful, but a prize seized by the brave. The atmosphere of pride and hope is so thick it can be felt in every market stall and every trench along the frontier. The giant of the Sahel is no longer a ghost. It is a fortress of grain gold and the unyielding will of millions who have decided that they would rather die standing than live on their knees. But as the ink dried on the new Confederate treaties and the first passports were handed to the citizens, a different kind of storm was gathering on the horizon. The old empires do not accept defeat easily. While the people celebrated their newfound strength, the mechanisms of global isolation were being quietly recalibrated to turn this fortress of dignity into a prison of scarcity. The world watched in stunned silence, but in the shadows, the first whispers of a systematic blockade were turning into a deafening roar. The international community has long been a euphemism for Western consensus, a club where the rules were written in languages the Sahel was only meant to translate, never speak. When the traditional patrons in Paris and Washington realized that the strings of aid were being cut, their reaction was a mixture of condemnation and quiet alarm. They predicted that isolation would bring the nation to its knees, but they failed to see that a sovereign nation does not fear being alone. It fears being a vassal. In February 2025, the government made the historic decision to withdraw from the International Organization of La Francophonie, followed by a departure from the International Criminal Court in September. These were not impulsive acts. They were calculated strikes against institutions that had become instruments of neo-colonial control. Even the regional bloc of ECOWAS, intended to be a shield for economic integration, was perceived instead as a sword used to strike at the people through sanctions that stopped medicine and fuel from reaching those in need. Before we reveal the next chapter, which is perhaps the most powerful assertion of sovereignty you will ever hear, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If this channel has moved you, if these stories are touching something deep in your spirit, then consider becoming a member. Not for exclusive content or perks, but because supporting this channel is directly supporting narratives that mainstream media refuses to tell. Every membership is a vote for Africa Unchained's mission. Every member becomes a co-creator of the revolution we are documenting. Join us. Stand with the principle that African wealth belongs to Africa. As the old doors closed, new ones were opened with surgical precision. Strategic alliances have been deepened with the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China, Iran, and Turkey. This is not about swapping one master for another, as detractors claim, but about the power of diversification. When you have only one bread seller, he sets the price. When you have 5, you decide what to pay. The arrival of technical specialists from the Africa Corps and Turkish engineers signals a shift toward a partnership that builds capacity rather than a dependency that weakens. At the heart of this diplomatic pivot is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who has applied a principle of reciprocity that has stunned the global stage. His message to the world's powers is simple: respect us and we will work with you. Disrespect us and the door is closed. This is the strategy of a nation that refuses to be a doormat for foreign interests. While the West cries isolation, The nation is busy making new friends in places like Hungary, Turkmenistan, and Kyrgyzstan, proving that sovereignty is not given, it is taken. They have shown that a small landlocked nation can look the great powers in the eye and negotiate as a partner, not a beggar. This is the manifestation of dignity over aid. The understanding that true friendship cannot exist between a master and a servant. This defiance is funded not by the World Bank, but by the people themselves. The Patriotic Support Fund has mobilized nearly 500 billion CFA francs since its launch, a massive internal investment in survival. From the bustling markets of the capital to the smallest rural villages, citizens have given a portion of their own sweat to fund the drones and the schools. The most dangerous weapon in the imperialist arsenal has always been the dependency on imported grain. Yet the soil of the Sahel had a different answer. In the agricultural campaign of 2025 to 2026, the harvest did not just arrive, it overflowed. 7 million tons of cereals were harvested, covering 126.6% of the national needs. This is the end of the neoliberal lie that the state should not interfere in production. The government commanded the water, rehabilitated over 35,000 hectares of irrigated land, and distributed 70,000 tons of fertilizer. They turned the dusty plains into a breadbasket, proving that a fed nation is a nation that cannot be controlled. But as the diplomatic map is redrawn and the old chains are broken, a new and even more ambitious frontier is being approached. To truly cement this independence, the nation must do more than just change its friends. It must change the very energy that powers its future. The pursuit of the atom is no longer a dream of the distant future, but a roadmap that is being signed in the present, leading to a leap that has terrified the established order. The trajectory has been reset with concrete precision, and the world is about to witness a jump from the darkness of the past into the blinding light of a nuclear future. To understand the machine, one must first understand the man who turned the key. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not merely a soldier in fatigues. He is the architect of a radical social experiment designed to stitch the social fabric of a nation back together. In a world where the elite often watch the suffering of the poor from the safety of gated villas, Traoré introduced the Citizen Immersion Program. This is a bold, perhaps even jarring initiative that requires the sons of the wealthy to live the lives of the marginalized, sleeping on simple mats and eating the same humble grains as the peasants. It is a reminder that privilege carries a debt, and that debt is paid in service to the nation. This is how you build a class of upright men who understand that the soil belongs to everyone. But this spiritual renewal is backed by a ruthless modern efficiency. To ensure that the wealth of the land reaches the hands of the people, the administration launched a digital purge of the old guard. By digitizing the tax system and removing physical cash from the reach of bureaucrats, they effectively removed the oxygen from the fires of corruption. Over 3,000 companies underwent tax audits, recovering 47 billion CFA francs that had been draining through the cracks of mismanagement for decades. For the observer in the West who values transparency and the rule of law, this is the clearest signal yet. Burkina Faso is no longer a playground for the corrupt. It is a fortress of accountability. Pause for a moment and share with us where you are watching this video. Is it from Africa, from Europe, from the Americas, or from a small village whose name deserves to be spoken aloud? Tell us in the comments, because every place matters and your presence here fuels this narrative. Africa Unchained wants to thank you personally for being part of this journey, and we send a heartfelt wish across the distance to each of you. May freedom walk beside you. May your hands find strength in your labor, and may dignity be the light on the road ahead for you and your family. This internal strengthening is what allows the nation to face the price of pride. Yes, the old empires do not simply walk away. They retreat into the shadows, waiting for a single moment of complacency to strike. The leadership calls them the valleys of imperialism, those who benefit from dependency and would rather see a continent in shackles than a nation in stride. But the response from Ouagadougou has been one of industrial defiance. The launch of the Text Force Textile Unit and the FASO Rail integrated railway industrial complex signals a new dawn where the nation finally processes its own cotton and tans its own leather. This is the strategic heart of dignity over aid. It is the realization that you cannot be truly independent if you export your raw wealth only to buy it back as finished goods at a premium. As any seasoned investor or citizen of the greatest generation knows, true wealth is built on production, not speculation. By ensuring that raw materials are no longer just dug out of the ground to enrich foreign vaults, Traoré is effectively exporting poverty and importing wealth. They are not just digging holes in the ground. They are laying the tracks for a modern economy that will link production centers and break the logistical stranglehold of being a landlocked nation. The pursuit of the atom, the digitization of the soul, and the return to the land are all parts of the same puzzle. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is demanding the highest technology available because he refuses to accept the appropriate technology often forced upon Africa, a code word for low-tech solutions that keep nations poor and manageable. By sending students to Moscow to learn atomic physics rather than poetry, the administration is preparing a generation to manage a power grid that will fuel the factories of tomorrow. Yet as the granaries fill and the schools reopen their doors to children who no longer fear the horizon, a darker threat is emerging. The successful institutionalization of this alliance has sent shockwaves through the boardrooms of the old world. They saw the drones, they saw the gold, and they saw people who had forgotten how to beg. The harvest is nearly ready, but the shadows are lengthening, and the true measure of this revolution will soon be tested by a storm that no drone can see and no wall can stop. The recovery of the land was merely the first movement in a symphony of survival. The true measure of this revolution is found not in the military parades, but in the quiet, steady return of a people to their ancestral hearths. For years, the roads of the Sahel were filled with the sorrow of departure, a trail of shadows fleeing from fear. But in 2025, the tide turned into a migration of dignity. Over 1,160,000 souls have walked back to their lands, lighting fires once more in 871 localities that the world had prematurely marked as ghost towns. They did not return to ashes, but to the foundations of a new life. Over 600 educational structures have resumed classes, breaking the silence of fear with the sound of children learning the history of their own courage. In these classrooms, the curriculum has been reclaimed. The lessons are no longer about the glories of a distant empire, but about the civic duty to mold the patriots of tomorrow. This is the central achievement of Burkina Faso today, a nation that has stopped outsourcing its soul and started building its own future. While the experts in distant capitals predicted economic ruin, this land recorded a growth rate of 6.5%. While global economies stuttered under the weight of inflation, this besieged nation achieved a deflation of 0.5%. They have proven that when a people decide to stand, the market must follow. The trade surplus has exceeded 1,975 billion CFA francs, a figure that is not just a statistic, but a testament to the people who have refused to import what they can make with their own calloused hands. The vision is no longer just about survival. It is about the birth of a confederation, a stepping stone towards the United States of Africa. The trajectory has changed forever. The giant is awake, and the roaring of its progress will echo through history. They are no longer the subjects of an empire, but the architects of their own survival. However, the harvest is not yet fully gathered, and though the dawn has broken, the shadows of the old order still linger in the corners of the continent, waiting for the fire to flicker. Before we close, let us pause. What you have just witnessed is not simply an episode of history. It is a reminder that sovereignty, dignity, and hope are still alive, waiting to be claimed by those brave enough to reach for them. If this message has moved you, if it has stirred something in your spirit that refuses to be silenced, then subscribe to this channel, Africa Unchained. Not because we ask for numbers, but because we are building a space where voices of independence are honored and where stories of pride continue to be told. By subscribing, you are not just supporting a channel. You are choosing to walk with us into the next chapter of Africa's unfolding story. Do not let this moment pass into silence. Subscribe and stand ready for the chapter that comes after this one. We have walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and we have seen a nation refuse to die. We have witnessed people who were told they were too poor, too weak, and too divided to stand alone. Yet here they stand, not on their knees begging for aid, but on their feet, building their own destiny. This is the lesson that Captain Ibrahim Traoré offers to the world, that sovereignty is not a gift granted by the powerful. It is a prize seized by the brave. From the reclaimed fields of the Sahel to the new factories of Ouagadougou, the message is clear. This is no longer a country of victims. It is a country of architects. Under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, they have proven that the soil is rich enough to feed the nation and that the spirit of true independence is a guiding fire that cannot be extinguished by sanctions or shadows. They have chosen dignity over aid, and in doing so, they have shattered the begging bowl forever. The chains are broken. The giant is awake, and the world will never be the same again. Homeland or death, we shall overcome. Long live a free and sovereign Africa.